Hey guys, what is going on? Daniel here. Now this is the third episode of this series of what you need to know about a WRX or an STI. Now, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, I will link the playlist down below, and also I'll put a card above me as well, that way you can check it out. And in this episode, I'll actually be telling you 3 things that you need to know about your WRX or STI, and kind of maybe some issues that you're having inside the cab, maybe getting fumes in the cab or something like that. I'll be sorting that out in this episode. Alright guys, so the first possible issue that you could be having that's causing the smoke or fumes that's coming into your cab or cabin is that the coolant overflow tank, it could be leaking. So what I mean by that is one of the hoses there, you got 3 hoses on the top, you also have a hose underneath as well. Now you could be leaking from one of those 4 hoses. I had a leak on the top hose, one of the big ones, which I'll show you shortly, and also so I had to put a hose clamp over the top of it. So the stock hose clamps that were on there, not hose clamps, they were the spring clamps, which are the worst clamps in the world. They actually failed and was not keeping it tight, because once you take that hose off the first time, because all the corrosion that's there, and I tried to sand it, I tried to get rid of it, but it still didn't have a good seal once I put the hose back on. So I had to get a hose clamp from the store and then tighten it up, and that solved that issue. Now the same thing on the bottom of the overflow tank, because once you take it off, it's really hard to get back on because of the corrosion. So what I had to do, I took the hose back off, I sanded it down a little bit, trying to get the corrosion off as much as possible, put the hose back on, and then I put another hose clamp over the top of that hose. That way that tightened it, and it also solved that issue. So what was happening, all the coolant that was coming out of it was actually leaking down and then finding its way onto the exhaust, and then it was burning off, and all that fumes was going into the cabin. And obviously it wasn't fun, and it wasn't easy to breathe with all those fumes coming through. Now as you can see, I actually have a hose clamp on here just to tighten this. This one just has the regular spring clamps here and here. This one had it before, but like I was saying, it's actually leaking from here, and when it was coming from there, it was actually traveling down and it was going onto the exhaust just below, and then all that smoke was going into the cab, which wasn't ideal. So that's definitely a thing, especially if you're pulling it off. You want to tighten this. Sometimes it comes out of there, leaks, and make sure that they're all tight and there's no liquid coming out. So it's definitely a thing you have to look for. Now the second possible issue that you could be having is one that I had. All these issues that I actually had myself. That's why I know of these issues. The second one is that you could have a rocket cover gasket leak or a valve cover gasket leak, which is the same thing. People call it different names. So you could be having one of those leaks, which I'll be showing you again shortly in the same episode, obviously. What happened was, it was actually leaking on the bottom side of the rocket cover gasket. It was leaking, and then when it was leaking, it was actually falling or dripping down onto my exhaust, and it was burning off. So it was also burning a hole into the exhaust, and also all the fumes from the oil, it was actually burning off and coming up into the cabin, because it was burning off and going into the cab. And obviously it was very hard to breathe, and I always had the windows down. So that's another thing you gotta look out for. Because my rocket cover gaskets were leaking, or valve cover gaskets were leaking, which is down below. That's your valve cover right there, and then right underneath, it was actually leaking. So that's definitely a thing you have to look for, because it was leaking, it was hitting the exhaust, and then it was burning on the actual exhaust, and then it was finding its way back into the cab. And then obviously I had to go with the windows down every time I was driving, because it was so bad and so toxic that I wanted to pass out. So that's definitely a thing. Check that if there's oil coming underneath the rocket cover gasket, that's definitely a sign that either the gasket's leaking or something there is leaking. It could be leaking from up somewhere else, but that's definitely a thing, which is very common. So it's definitely what you want to have a look out for. Now the third possible issue that you could be having is probably, you want to do this, you could probably do this first is the grommets in the firewall. That's one that I had. It sort of added to all these other issues. Now the previous owner took the grommets out or moved them aside because they had certain things going through the firewall. So instead of drilling holes through the grommet to put the cables and wire, the cables and hoses through the grommet to keep it a nice seal, he just opened the grommet, pulled it aside, and just put it through the firewall. So there was a massive gap. So any type of fume was just going straight into the cab. So I'll show you now as well, is that the grommets, how they are now, and that's probably another way to solve one of those fumes from getting into the cabin. Now another thing they actually want to look out for is the grommets that are going into the firewall from the engine bay to the cab. As you can see, there's a couple grommets here. There's this one here, that one there, and there's also another one just there. So what happened with me is because the previous owner had a couple things wiring up. As you can see here, I've tidied it all up, but he had these red cable coming in, and also the this hose here. It was actually next to the grommet, so he took the grommet out and just passed it through. So all the fumes that were in the cab were actually traveling through, going straight in. And then also same here, this grommet, this massive one here, was actually pulled off, and all the fumes again were coming through. So that's something that I fixed. It's not much of a fix, but just put back in neatly and drilled this hole, because once again this was around the grommet rather than drilling straight through. So put the grommet on, drilled the hole, and then same thing here. I drilled the hole through the grommet. That way I can put the wire and also the hose for the boost gauge through the grommet. That way it's nice and tidy and there's not much of a leak coming through. So that's something you can look out for. So if the fumes are coming in, that's definitely another option that you can look at. That could be another factor in that. Now I'm going to actually tell you a bonus tip of one of the possible issues that you could be having as well, is that the power steering line. Now I had a leak in the power steering line, and it was actually leaking. It was dripping all the way down, hitting the exhaust, and then once again it was burning into the cab. So that's another thing you could be looking at. One of the hoses was actually leaking. So then once it was dripping down, the power steering fluid was hitting the exhaust. It was then going up into the cab, burning up into the engine bay, and then traveling through the firewall into the cab. And then I would always have to have the windows down because it was very, very toxic. I did end up solving that, which I have in another episode. I'll link the card up above. Now remember, if you are enjoying today's content, make sure to let me know down in the comments down below. And also let me know what issues you're having with your WRX or STI, and then maybe we can put in another episode that we can help out other people who might be having the same issues. Make sure to hit the like button down below, subscribe for the rest of the series and maybe other videos that I do as well.